All right, in this video, I want to talk a little bit about our risk administration. And I want to talk about the most important piece that I feel you are going to need to know about to have a successful implementation of the risk management application of GRC. And here I'm administration, and right now I'm in properties. And you can see this properties is part of the GRC profiles application. But what I want you to look at is these top two options right here. So within risk management, and this is going to be an industry term, not just a ServiceNow specific term, we have two ways that we score risk. We have qualitative and quantitative. Now, a little bit of explanation of what they are. You don't necessarily have to understand what they are to be able to implement ServiceNow or to develop risk management, but it is helpful because it can help guide your discussion. And out of the box, ServiceNow is going to use either qualitative, or actually, let me back up there. Out of the box, ServiceNow is going to use a quantitative risk scoring in our risk register. We have the option here that we can use our impact score as qualitative and our likelihood score as qualitative if needed. We could just make that change right here in our risk management properties. Now, what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative? And again, remember, this is industry-wide, not just a ServiceNow specific term. So qualitative is when we're looking at how likely something is going to happen, or we look at the impact, and we don't use numeric values. We use terms like likely, not likely, somewhat likely, very likely, extremely likely, right? We're just simply saying this is what we feel by looking at this risk, how likely it's going to happen, and the impact. What's the impact? Is it minor, major, high, critical? That's qualitative. Now, the next one is quantitative. Now, quantitative, always remember, quantitative has an N in it, and that is all about numbers. With quantitative, what we're focused on is the actual numeric values of a risk. So an example, if we have a risk, we're down south in the United States, we get a lot of tornadoes. And we know that's a risk that we face is a tornado could destroy our building. Well, we look at how much is our building worth, how much of our building is going to be destroyed, how likely is a tornado to happen each year, or how many years between tornadoes happening. In that case, what we start to do then is we get the numeric values and we calculate, here's how much money we can expect to lose each year because of this risk, right? Quantitative, also remember, it's a very mature process for that because we have to actually know the numbers. Now, a lot of organizations that are smaller or immature with their risk management process, they're most likely going to be using qualitative, right? It's a good starting place to say, okay, how likely is a tornado to happen if we're down south in the United States? Well, it's very likely. Well, okay, well, what's the impact? Well, we could say it's critical if a tornado comes through. That's good, but how can we financially prepare for that if all we know is the impact is critical and it's very likely to happen? And that's the benefit of quantitative, is now we can prepare for it financially because we now know the numbers attached to our building, to our assets in that building, and we can start to prepare better for it. Now again, out of the box, we can use qualitative or quantitative. We can't use both out of the box without some custom configuration. So out of the box, starting out, we're going to look at quantitative because that's what ServiceNow has set by default. Now what I want to do is we'll show you quantitative and qualitative and what it looks like here in ServiceNow, and then we'll come back to our properties so we can talk about these other items. All right, so let's go to our risk register here, and we want to go to all risk. We can open up any one. This loss of confidentiality will work. And what I'm focused on is my scoring tab. Now you may say here, this is quantitative, right? It's all about numbers. Now, inherent means the risk that we just simply inherit because of our location, right? Again, using our tornado example, if you have a business in the tornado belt in the United States, you are going to inherit that risk of tornadoes, right? And so we say our inherent single loss expectancy because of tornado to our building is $20 million. So if a tornado comes through, destroys our building, destroys our assets, destroys our equipment, destroys our office, we can plan on losing $20 million because of that. And we look at our inherent annualized rate of occurrence. We say, okay, well, how often does a tornado happen? We could say if it happened every year, we would change this to a 1, right? And we're doing 20 million times 1 because we could expect to lose $20 million each year to a tornado. But if it happened every 10 years, right, and we always get a message right here that my inherent can never be lower than my residual. And for a second, let's talk about the difference between an inherent and residual. Remember, inherent is we just inherit this maybe because of our location or the type of business we are. We inherit certain risk. Typically, you're going to see a lot of inherent risk with location, right? It could be if you're up north, you're going to get snowstorms, thunderstorms, right? That's inherent risk. Down south, tornadoes, Florida, the coastline, hurricanes, earthquakes out west. Those are inherent risks, simply risks that we get because of our location. Residual risk is the risk that's left over after we have performed some type of action. So remember, inherent is the risk that we start off with. Residual, the risk that is left over from some type of remediation or some type of response that we did to a risk. So we can see our SLE and our ARO is calculated automatically by ServiceNow, and that's going to give us our inherent annualized loss expectancy. So that's how much money we could expect to lose each year because of this risk. Now, what's good about this is we could then set money aside to say, okay, if a tornado comes through, we could lose $20 million because of this. Well, we know a tornado is going to happen every 10 years. We could get a very bad tornado. And so each year, we should be prepared to put aside, looks like $2 million. So each year, if we put aside $2 million, that way when the tornado happens, we will be covered with this risk. And see, so point 1 is going to be 10 years. Point 2, that's going to be every 5 years. All right, we are going to face this risk. Now that's where it gets a little tricky with our calculations. You may think, well, point 2 wouldn't be 20. No, that's when we start having to say, we add the 0.01. Right, now we're getting it. You can always look at the numbers, right? You always do a calculation between that. But here we'll say every 10 years we expect this to happen, so we need to put away $2 million each year. That way we have this risk covered when it does occur. And our inherent score, right, is 4 high. Now these values are actually coming over from our administration, and we're looking at our risk criteria. So this is where we would actually set these values, right? We wouldn't go into our dictionary entry here and set those values there. We go to our risk criteria, and this is where we would simply set what our inherent numbers are for scoring, calculated score. And our residual, again, this is our response. So let's say, again, we're down south, we deal with a lot of tornadoes, and we say, okay, well, our response is we're going to buy insurance that's going to cover us up to $10 million. And so we know that we're not getting rid of tornadoes. We're just simply, we bought insurance that covers us up to $10 million. And so our residual single loss expectancy would be $10 million. And the annualized rate of occurrence is still the same, right? Buying insurance isn't going to cause a tornado to happen any less or any more, right? All we did was buy insurance to help cover our cost of the building. And so now we can see that our residual ALE would be $1 million. So we cut our expense in theory in half. So just know the difference with quantitative and qualitative. Again, you don't have to be an expert in these abbreviations right here, but it can help to know when you're doing an implementation or you're developing what these are and what they're trying to accomplish. Now let's go to risk criteria and then I'll show you qualitative. So risk criteria, this is where we're setting, okay, our score is going to be too low if our maximum value is at 5 million. So that's where we are setting those values right there. Let's do a change. Let's go to properties and let's switch this to qualitative and let's save. And now let's go back to our risk registry here, all risk, and we can actually open up that same risk. And we're going to notice some difference in the scoring tab. And so now what we've had here is we have an inherent impact, inherent likelihood, and this we just have options. Remember impact, okay, what's the impact if a tornado comes through and hits our building? Well, it'd probably be, a very high impact. And then what's the inherent likelihood? Well, probably very likely that it's going to happen. And now what ServiceNow has right here is auto-calculating ALE and residual ALE based upon these two field choices here. Now, if you remember, when we went to our administration risk criteria, this is where we're telling ServiceNow, okay, if our impact is very high and likelihood is this, go ahead and set our ALE to this. Right? If we were to change that, again, always remember inherent has to be at the same or higher than your residual. So we see a change here. Now what I typically see with some clients is they want to get rid of these. If they're using qualitative risk scoring, they just want to see these fields right here. They're not ready for the numbers and they don't simply know what they are. So you can always just hide these fields if necessary. But this case, qualitative, right, it's a very starter, basic way of calculating risk. And a lot of organizations are going to do this simply because they may not know the numeric value of a risk and they're not mature enough to handle that. So that's why we have two different ways of calculating our risk score here. Always remember residual has to be at the same level or lower than inherent. If I were to change this to very high, see ServiceNow lets me know residual impact must be less than or equal to inherent. I mean, once we do something, we can't make a risk greater because of our response. So it always has to be the same level or lower. Sometimes what I see is clients want to do a little bit of both. They want to have the qualitative, but they also want to add some custom fields in where they can start marking what they believe the financial loss will be because of this risk. But always know out of the box, ServiceNow is going to use that quantitative risk scoring, and you have to switch it to qualitative if that's what the organization wants. That's probably the biggest piece about administration that you really need to know about. And let's go back to properties here. Again, a lot of this is other basic stuff. State for which risk is active, draft, assess, review, monitor. State for which is not, is retired. We can make risk statement mandatory in risk, yes or no. So we always have to tie a risk to a risk statement. May not want to do that because, again, a lot of organizations may not have risk statements that they have in ServiceNow. Our compare risk tolerance based on a sum. So we're looking at this sum. Average calculated ALE. That's what we're comparing our calculated risk score with. And here we're setting our risk assessment for our risk, which we looked at in the life cycle and the risk assessment, again, very much like the GRC assessment. And we can choose to hide upstream and downstream risk, and we can auto-close issue created by indicator if we wanted to, right? Because we can do indicators against our risk, if you remember, and if a risk indicator fails, it's going to create an issue. Well, we could just tell ServiceNow, go ahead and automatically close that, or we could just work the issue if needed. But I would say right here, most important piece to know with risk administration, Some of these other options right here, heat map color setting, simply telling ServiceNow, okay, very high, these are, the options right here and the color for each of them. So our impact very high, likelihood is very high, extremely likely. We want that color to be critical. Whereas if it's impact very high, likelihood of unlikely, our color is going to be a medium color, so probably like a blue or a green. But again, a lot of organizations, you may not have to change that. They're just going to stick with out of the box. GRC properties, not a whole lot to know here. Typically, right, this is going to stay out of the box. Assessment types, this is where we're going to have our different risk assessments and our different assessments for our risk application. You see, I have a lot right here. That's because I activated those NIST and GDPR plugins. If you don't activate those, you're probably only going to see the risk assessment here. But again, we're going to dive into this in the risk assessment video coming up. Or if you already watched it, the risk assessment video. But that is really administration. Again, I would say the most important piece for you to know, this right here. Know that out of the box, ServiceNow is going to use quantitative risk scoring, and you have to switch it to qualitative if that's what the organization wants to use.